During confession, a parishioner whispered, "I've been secretly watching my biological daughter at your services for months." As her pastor, I was bound to silence, but her obsession was growing dangerous. When a medical crisis struck our congregation, God's plan unfolded in ways none of us could have imagined. My name is Father Michael O'Connor, and I've served Riverside Community Church for 2 decades. In that time, I've counseled troubled marriages, comforted the grieving, and guided lost souls back to the Lord's path. My wife Susan and I have been blessed with a beautiful daughter, Emily, whom we adopted as an infant 16 years ago. She's the light of our lives, a gentle soul with her mother's compassion, and what I like to think is my stubborn determination to do what's right. That particular evening started like countless others. I'd just finished reviewing my sermon notes for Sunday's service about God's perfect timing when Mrs. Henderson knocked on my office door. She needed prayer for her grandson's deployment overseas. After we prayed together, I made my way to the confession area, a quiet corner of our church where troubled hearts come seeking peace. The sanctuary held that special stillness that comes just before evening prayer. Dust motes danced in the colored light streaming through our stained glass windows, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic on Main Street. These moments of quiet preparation have always been sacred to me. As Psalm 46:10 reminds us, "Be still and know that I am God." I'd been waiting perhaps 10 minutes when she arrived. The woman who approached looked to be in her mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were neat but modest, a navy cardigan over a white blouse, the kind of outfit that wouldn't draw attention in any crowd. But her eyes held a weight that spoke of years of carrying something heavy. "Father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to confess something that's been eating at my soul for 16 years. I've heard those words before, in various forms. People carry burdens for decades sometimes, letting guilt and shame grow like weeds in their hearts until they can't bear the weight alone anymore." I settled into my chair and offered her the gentle smile that had comforted hundreds of troubled souls. "God's mercy is new every morning," I assured her. "Whatever burden you're carrying, His grace is sufficient." She took a shuddering breath, and I could see her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "Father, 16 years ago, I was 19 and unmarried. I had a baby, a beautiful little girl." My heart went out to her immediately. Young mothers facing impossible choices, I'd counseled many over the years. The pain in her voice was real, raw, and heartbreaking. "I gave her up for adoption," she continued, tears beginning to flow. "I was young, scared, and had no support. I thought it was the right thing to do. But Father, I've regretted it every day since." I reached for the tissue box that lived permanently on the small table between us. These conversations required patience, compassion, and often a good supply of tissues. "The love of a mother is one of God's greatest gifts," I said gently. "Making that choice took tremendous courage and love." She accepted the tissues but continued speaking through her tears. "Father, I need to tell you something else, something that's been tearing me apart. I found her." My pastoral instincts immediately went on alert. "Found her?" "My daughter. I hired a private investigator last year. I know where she lives, where she goes to school." Her voice dropped to barely audible. "I know where she goes to church." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy cloak. This was moving into territory that concerned me deeply. "And what have you done with this information?" She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold, a desperate, hungry love that bordered on obsession. "Father, I've been watching her. Every Sunday for months now. She comes here, to this very church, with her family. She sits 3 rows from the front, always on the left side. She's beautiful, Father. She has my eyes, my smile." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Our church, Sunday mornings, 3 rows from the front, left side. That was exactly where my family sat every Sunday, exactly where my Susan sat with our Emily. "Father," she continued, oblivious to the earthquake happening in my chest, "I watch her sing the hymns, and my heart nearly bursts with pride. But I also ache because she doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know that her real mother is sitting just a few rows behind her, loving her from afar." I fought to keep my expression neutral, my pastoral training warring with the paternal panic rising in my throat. What does this young lady look like?" "She's about 5'4", with long brown hair that she usually wears in a braid. She has these expressive green eyes that light up when she laughs. Oh, Father, she has the most beautiful laugh. She plays piano sometimes during the youth service, and she's talented. So very talented." Every word was a knife through my heart. She was describing my Emily, my precious daughter, the child Susan and I had raised from infancy, loved unconditionally, and considered one of God's greatest blessings in our lives. "There's something else," she whispered, leaning forward conspiratorially. I think it's time I introduced myself to her." The confession booth suddenly felt like it was closing in around me. Here was a woman, clearly unstable, who had been stalking my daughter for months. She was sitting in my church, confessing to behavior that terrified me as a father, yet bound by the sacred seal of confession, I couldn't act on what she'd told me. As if sensing my internal struggle, she looked directly into my eyes and said the words that would haunt me for weeks to come. "Father, this Sunday, I'm going to approach her after service. I'm going to tell her who I am." My mouth went dry. The sacred duty of pastoral confidentiality warred with every paternal instinct I possessed. In that moment, I understood exactly how King Solomon must have felt when 2 women claimed the same baby. I managed to find my voice, though it sounded foreign to my own ears. Perhaps we should discuss this more thoroughly. These situations require great wisdom and care." She smiled then, and it was the smile of someone who had made up her mind. "Oh, I've been careful, Father, so very careful, but I can't wait any longer. I need my daughter to know that her real mother loves her." As she left the confession booth that night, I sat in the growing darkness of our sanctuary, my hands shaking as I tried to pray. The woman had just confessed to months of stalking behavior directed at my own child, and by the sacred laws of our faith, I was bound to silence. But what she planned to do next would shatter not just my family's world, but challenge everything I believed about mercy, justice, and the sometimes impossible demands of pastoral duty. What happened in the days that followed would test my faith in ways I never imagined possible. And the resolution, well, you won't believe how God chose to work in this impossible situation. That night, sleep eluded me entirely. I found myself pacing the hardwood floors of our parsonage, my bare feet making soft whispers against the wood that Susan and Emily had helped me refinish 3 summers ago. The house felt different now, no longer the sanctuary it had always been, but somehow vulnerable, exposed. I kept thinking about how we came to adopt Emily 16 years ago. Susan and I had tried for children for nearly 4 years after our marriage. We'd undergone every test, pursued every treatment our small-town doctor could recommend. I remember sitting in that sterile medical office, holding Susan's hand, as Dr. Morrison gently explained that biological children simply weren't in God's plan for us. "But Pastor," he'd said with that kind smile that had comforted half our congregation over the years, "sometimes the Lord has different blessings in mind." He was right, of course. 3 months later, a social worker named Mrs. Patterson called us about a newborn baby girl whose teenage mother had specifically requested a Christian family. "She wants her daughter raised in faith," Mrs. Patterson had explained during our meeting at the county adoption agency. The moment they placed Emily in my arms, I understood what the Apostle Paul meant when he wrote about adoption in Ephesians, how we become children of God not through blood, but through love and choice. This tiny, perfect baby with her wisps of brown hair and those remarkably alert green eyes wasn't just becoming our daughter. She was completing our family in a way that felt divinely orchestrated. Now, 16 years later, standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m, I wondered if that orchestration included this moment of crisis. Had God known, even then, that this day would come? I found myself studying the woman's face in my memory. During those sleepless hours, details emerged that I'd missed in the shock of her confession. She had the same stubborn cowlick at her left temple that Emily fought with every morning. Her hands, when she'd reached for the tissues, moved with the same graceful precision that made Emily such a natural at piano. Even her voice carried that slight rasp that made Emily's singing so distinctive in our youth choir. The resemblance wasn't just possible. It was unmistakable. Rebecca Clark. I'd seen her name in our visitor registry over the past several months, always signing in alone, always sitting in the back. Our congregation was large enough that new faces didn't immediately stand out, especially when they kept to themselves. But now I remembered her, always arriving just as service started, always leaving quickly afterward, never staying for fellowship or coffee hour. What troubled me most wasn't her presence, but her intensity. I'd noticed how her eyes followed Emily during service, how she seemed to lean forward whenever Emily played piano or participated in readings. At the time, I'd assumed she was simply appreciating our young people's involvement in worship. Now I understood it was something far more complex and concerning. As dawn broke over our small town, I found myself in our sanctuary, kneeling before the altar that had anchored my spiritual life for 2 decades. The morning light filtered through our stained glass windows, casting familiar patterns across the worn carpet where countless souls had sought comfort and guidance. "Lord," I prayed, "you know the depths of this situation better than I ever could. You know this woman's heart, her pain, her desperation. You know my family's peace and happiness, and you know the sacred trust of confession that binds my tongue." I opened my Bible to 1 Kings, chapter 3, the account of Solomon's wisdom when 2 women claimed the same child. The real mother, faced with the threat of her baby's death, chose to give him up rather than see him harmed. Her love was proven through her willingness to sacrifice her own desires for her child's welfare. But what happened when both women genuinely loved the child? When both had legitimate claims to call themselves mother? That Sunday morning arrived with cruel normalcy. Susan hummed while making pancakes. Emily complained about her algebra homework, and our golden retriever Max begged for bacon scraps just like every other Sunday of our lives. Yet everything felt different to me, viewed through the lens of impending crisis. During breakfast, I found myself memorizing Emily's laugh, the way she wrinkled her nose when she concentrated on difficult problems, how she unconsciously braided her hair when nervous about upcoming tests. These small, precious details of our daily life together suddenly felt fragile, as if I were storing them up against some approaching winter. "Dad, you're being weird," Emily announced, catching me staring at her over my coffee cup. "Is everything okay?" The question pierced my heart. How could I explain that everything might be about to change, that her quiet life was about to be disrupted by forces beyond any of our control? "Just grateful for our family," I managed, which was absolutely true, if incomplete. Susan squeezed my hand across the table. "He's getting sentimental in his old age," she teased. But I caught the slight concern in her eyes. After 18 years of marriage, she could read my moods better than I could read scripture. As we walked into church that morning, I found my eyes immediately scanning the congregation. There she was, Rebecca Clark, sitting in her usual spot in the back, wearing a floral dress that seemed chosen to blend in rather than stand out. But her focus was laser sharp, fixed on my family as we made our way to our customary pew. Throughout the service, I struggled to concentrate on my own sermon about God's faithfulness through trials. The words felt hollow in my mouth, even as I preached about trusting in divine providence during difficult circumstances. How could I encourage others to have faith when my own was being tested so severely? During the closing hymn, I watched Rebecca in my peripheral vision. She sang along to "How Great Thou Art" with genuine emotion, tears streaming down her face as she watched Emily's clear soprano voice rise above the congregation. In that moment, I saw not a threat to my family, but a broken woman whose love for her biological daughter was real and deep and devastating in its intensity. After the benediction, as our congregation filed out for fellowship hour, I saw Rebecca moving toward the front of the church. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized her intention. This was it, the moment she'd promised during confession. She was heading straight for Emily, who stood chatting with her Sunday school friends near the piano. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events so complex and heartbreaking that even now I can barely believe how it all unfolded. I moved faster than decorum usually allowed in God's house, weaving through the dispersing congregation with what I hoped looked like pastoral urgency, rather than parental panic. But I was too late. By the time I reached the front of the sanctuary, Rebecca was already standing beside Emily, her hand gently touching my daughter's shoulder as she spoke in low, earnest tones. Emily's face showed polite confusion, the expression of a well-raised teenager encountering an overly familiar adult. "Emily, dear," I heard Rebecca saying as I approached, "you have such a beautiful voice. I've been listening to you sing for months now, and it just fills my heart with joy." "Thank you, ma'am," Emily replied, with the courtesy Susan and I had instilled in her. "I love singing in church. It feels like praying, you know." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears at those words. "Yes, sweetheart. Exactly like praying." I cleared my throat. "Emily, your mother's waiting for you in the fellowship hall. Something about helping with the coffee service." It wasn't entirely true, but it served its purpose. Emily excused herself politely and hurried off, leaving me face to face with Rebecca Clark. Up close, the family resemblance was even more striking. They shared the same slightly upturned nose, the same way of tilting their head when listening intently. "Pastor O'Connor," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "She's even more wonderful than I imagined. Did you see how her face lit up when she talked about singing? She has such a pure heart." "Ms. Clark," I said carefully, "perhaps we could continue this conversation in my office." She shook her head, her gaze following Emily's retreating figure. "I can't stay long today, but Pastor, I wanted to thank you. Your family, they've raised her beautifully. I can see Christ's love in everything about her." Before I could respond, she was gone, slipping out through the side door like a ghost. The following week brought a series of incidents that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store mentioned that a nice lady had been asking questions about the O'Connor family, what we liked to buy, whether Emily had any allergies, if we had regular shopping days. Then Tom Bradley, Emily's algebra teacher, called to express concern about a woman who'd been sitting in her car across from the school during dismissal, always watching the students leave. His description matched Rebecca perfectly. But it was Susan's encounter that truly frightened me. She came home from her Tuesday errands visibly shaken. "Michael," she said, dropping her purse by the front door with trembling hands, "the strangest thing happened at the pharmacy today." I looked up from my sermon notes, immediately alert to the stress in her voice. There was a woman ahead of me in line, mid-30s, reddish hair. She started asking the pharmacist about Emily's prescriptions. She knew her name, knew she takes allergy medication, even knew which brand we prefer. My pen froze above the paper. "What did you do?" I spoke up, of course. Asked who she was and why she was inquiring about our daughter. She got flustered, mumbled something about being a family friend, and left quickly. But Michael... Susan sat down heavily beside me. She knew things, personal things, like how Emily breaks out in hives if she eats strawberries, or that she needs the non-drowsy formula because the regular antihistamines make her sleepy during school. That night, I knelt in our sanctuary until nearly dawn, wrestling with God and my conscience. The book of Ecclesiastes kept echoing in my mind. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. But what was the season for this situation? When did pastoral silence become complicity in something potentially dangerous? I began watching our congregation with new eyes during the following Sunday service. Rebecca sat in her usual spot, but now I noticed things I'd missed before. How she arrived precisely when the service started, always alone, always with a clear view of Emily. How she had memorized our routines, our hymn preferences, even the way Emily unconsciously braided her hair during the longer readings. During my sermon about the parable of the lost sheep, I found myself speaking directly to the situation without being able to name it. Sometimes our love for others can lead us down paths that harm rather than heal, I said, my eyes briefly meeting Rebecca's across the congregation. True love seeks the beloved's well-being above our own desires. I saw her flinch, but she didn't look away. After the service, I watched her pattern repeat. She lingered just long enough to observe Emily's interactions with her friends to see how our family moved through our post-service routines. But this time, I noticed something else that chilled me to the bone. She was taking pictures. Not obvious ones, just subtle phone photos that could easily be mistaken for checking messages or taking notes. But I saw the way she angled the device, the timing of her movements. She was documenting Emily's life, creating some kind of record. That afternoon, as Susan and Emily baked cookies for the youth group's upcoming mission trip, I found myself memorizing the scene. The flour dusting Susan's dark hair, Emily's concentrated expression as she measured vanilla extract, the comfortable rhythm of their conversation about Emily's upcoming junior year and college plans. How many more afternoons like this would we have before Rebecca's growing obsession shattered our peace? "Dad," Emily said suddenly, looking up from the mixing bowl, "is everything okay? You've been acting weird lately. Like weirder than usual." Susan laughed, but I caught the concern in her eyes. "Your father's been under a lot of stress with the building committee meetings," she said, covering for me as she always did. But Emily wasn't fooled. "It's not building committee stress," she said with the perceptiveness that made her such an insightful young woman. "You keep watching me like you're expecting something bad to happen." The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. I was expecting something bad to happen. I was watching my daughter with the desperate attention of someone trying to memorize her before she was taken away. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Susan confronted me directly. "Michael, what's going on? And don't tell me it's church business. I've been married to you for 18 years. I know when you're carrying something heavy." I wanted desperately to tell her everything, to share the burden that was eating away at my peace, my sleep, my ability to function as both pastor and father. But the sacred seal of confession bound my tongue as surely as iron chains. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "There are some pastoral situations I'm dealing with that I can't discuss. But I need you to trust me on something. Be extra aware of Emily's whereabouts. Don't let her walk home from school alone. If anything feels off, anything at all, call me immediately." Susan's face went pale. "Michael, you're scaring me. Is Emily in danger?" Before I could answer, we heard our daughter scream. We rushed upstairs to find Emily sitting up in bed, pointing at her bedroom window with shaking hands. "There was someone out there," she whispered. "A woman. She was just standing under the oak tree staring at the house." I ran outside in my pajamas, but found only trampled grass beneath Emily's window and the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume in the night air. What I discovered the next morning would prove that Rebecca's obsession had crossed a line that would force me to choose between my sacred vows and my family's safety. What I found the next morning beneath Emily's bedroom window confirmed my worst fears. Pressed into the soft earth were clear footprints, and tucked under a loose piece of bark on our old oak tree was a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, I unfolded what appeared to be a letter written in Rebecca's careful script. "My precious Emily, you don't know me yet, but I know everything about you. I know you love strawberry ice cream, but you're allergic to the fruit itself. I know you play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat when you're sad, and that you pray before every algebra test. I've been watching over you, protecting you from afar, just like a guardian angel. Soon, very soon, I'm going to tell you who I really am. Your birth mother, who loves you more than life itself. Love always, Mom." My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the letter. This wasn't just stalking anymore. This was preparation for something far more dangerous. I immediately called our local police chief, Dave Morrison, Dr. Morrison's son, who'd grown up in our congregation. Without mentioning the confession, I explained that we had a person showing concerning behavior around Emily. Dave promised to increase patrols around our neighborhood and the school. "Pastor," he said seriously, "if this escalates to any kind of contact or approach, you call me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." But even as I hung up the phone, I knew the situation was spiraling beyond what law enforcement could address. Rebecca wasn't going to be deterred by police patrols. Her obsession had reached a level where she believed she had divine right to her biological daughter. That Sunday, I preached about the story of Hannah giving up Samuel to serve in the temple. True love, I said, looking directly at Rebecca, sometimes means releasing those we cherish most, trusting God to work through the families He has placed them in. Rebecca's face flushed red during my sermon. When the service ended, instead of her usual quick departure, she approached me directly. "Pastor O'Connor," she said, her voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before, "that was an interesting sermon. But sometimes God calls us to fight for what's rightfully ours, doesn't He? Sometimes silence becomes complicity in keeping families apart." The congregation was still filing out around us, making it impossible to address her comments directly. But her message was clear. She knew I was trying to dissuade her, and she wasn't backing down. That afternoon, I made the most difficult phone call of my ministerial career. I contacted Bishop Williams, my denominational supervisor, without revealing any details of the confession. "Bishop," I said, "I need guidance on a hypothetical situation. If information received in pastoral confidence could prevent harm to innocent people, what are the ethical boundaries?" His response was exactly what I expected and dreaded. "Michael, the sacred trust of pastoral confidentiality is absolute. Even if we know someone might be hurt, we cannot break that seal. We must find other ways to address the situation while maintaining our sacred obligations." "But what if the person in danger is someone we love? Someone in our own family?" The silence on the other end stretched long. Finally, Bishop Williams spoke with unusual gravity. "Michael, that's when our faith is tested most severely. Are you facing such a situation?" "I can't say," I admitted. "But I may need to make an impossible choice soon." "Then pray, my son. Pray that God provides another way. Because breaking pastoral confidence is not an option, not even to save those we love most." As the week progressed, Rebecca's behavior became increasingly bold. Emily mentioned that the nice lady from church had approached her after school again, this time asking about her family history and whether she'd ever wondered about her biological parents. "I told her I didn't really think about it," Emily said over dinner. "My real parents are right here at this table, but she seemed kind of sad when I said that." Susan and I exchanged worried glances. "Honey," Susan said carefully, "if anyone asks you personal questions like that again, please come tell us immediately." "Is everything okay?" Emily asked, her perceptive green eyes moving between her parents. "You guys have been acting really strange lately. Are we in some kind of trouble?" The innocence in her question broke my heart. Here was our daughter, living her normal teenage life, completely unaware that her biological mother was spiraling into dangerous obsession just outside our family circle. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I found myself in the sanctuary at 3 a.m., prostrate before the altar, crying out to God for wisdom. The weight of protecting Emily while maintaining the sacred seal of confession was crushing me physically and spiritually. I opened my Bible to the story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice Isaac, seeking some parallel for my impossible situation. But every scripture I turned to seemed to offer conflicting guidance. Protect the innocent, honor your commitments, trust in God's plan, follow divine commandments. Thursday morning brought the crisis I'd been dreading. Rebecca appeared at my office door without an appointment, her eyes wild with determination. She sat down across from my desk and spoke with frightening calm. "Pastor, I've decided I can't wait any longer. Emily is turning 17 next month. She'll be an adult soon, able to make her own decisions about relationships. I need to tell her the truth before that happens. Rebecca, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Perhaps we should discuss this more carefully. These reunions require proper counseling, mediation. No more delays, she interrupted. I've been patient for 16 years. I've watched another woman raise my daughter, and I've stayed silent. But God has been telling me in my prayers that it's time. Emily needs to know who her real mother is. The delusion in her words terrified me. She was interpreting her obsession as divine calling. I'm telling you this as her pastor, she continued, because I want your support when I approach the family, when I tell Emily and her adoptive parents, who I am. I'm hoping you'll help them understand that this is God's will. My mouth went completely dry. She was asking me to participate in the destruction of my own family. Rebecca, I managed, these situations are very complex. The adopted family has legal rights, emotional bonds. Legal rights? Her voice rose sharply. I have natural rights, God-given rights. That girl is my flesh and blood. I could see she was beyond reasoning. The woman sitting across from me was no longer seeking guidance. She was informing me of her intentions. When? I asked quietly. This Sunday, after service. I'm going to tell Emily everything, and I'm going to ask her to come home with me where she belongs. After she left, I sat alone in my office, my head in my hands. In 3 days, Rebecca Clark was going to attempt to convince my daughter to leave our family. And I was bound by sacred oath to remain silent while she tore our world apart. What happened next would force me to choose between my most sacred vow as a pastor and my most fundamental duty as a father, and the choice I made would change everything forever. Friday morning brought news that shattered what remained of my composure. Mrs. Henderson called me at dawn, her voice shaking with panic. Pastor O'Connor, I need you to come to the hospital immediately. It's Emily. She collapsed at school yesterday afternoon. She's been admitted to the pediatric ward. My blood turned to ice. What? But Emily was fine when she left for school. She seemed perfectly normal. They're saying it might be her kidneys, Pastor. Dr. Morrison wants to run extensive tests, but he needs family medical history information, genetic background, things you might not have from the adoption records. I was already grabbing my keys and jacket. I'll be right there. As I raced through our small town toward Regional Medical Center, my mind reeled with possibilities. Emily had never shown signs of kidney problems. She was healthy, active, vibrant. But as we'd learned during the adoption process, there were always unknown genetic factors that could emerge. At the hospital, I found Susan sitting beside Emily's bed, holding our daughter's pale hand while monitors beeped softly around them. Emily was awake but looked frighteningly weak. "Dad," she whispered when she saw me, "I'm scared. They don't know what's wrong." Dr. Morrison pulled Susan and me into the hallway for a private conversation. "I'm concerned about Emily's kidney function," he said gravely. "Her blood work shows markers that suggest a genetic condition, possibly polycystic kidney disease or another hereditary disorder. But without family medical history, we're working blind." "What does that mean for treatment?" Susan asked, her voice tight with fear. "We need to know if there's a family history of kidney disease, what genetic markers to look for, whether she might need specialized treatment or even, eventually, a transplant from a family member." A transplant from a family member. The words hit me like lightning. Susan and I weren't Emily's biological relatives. We couldn't be donors if she needed one. But Rebecca Clark could be. "Doctor," I said carefully, "what if we could contact the biological family? Hypothetically?" "That would be ideal," Dr. Morrison replied. "Genetic information could guide our treatment, and if a transplant becomes necessary, biological relatives are often the best matches." I excused myself and walked to the hospital chapel, my legs barely carrying me. Sinking into a pew, I stared at the simple wooden cross on the wall and felt the weight of an impossible decision crushing down on me. Emily needed medical information that only Rebecca could provide. She might even need Rebecca's kidney to survive. But contacting Rebecca would mean revealing information from confession, something I'd sworn never to do. As I knelt in that quiet chapel, my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. "Pastor O'Connor, I heard about Emily's hospitalization through the church prayer chain. I'm praying for her recovery. I also want you to know that as her birth mother, I have medical information that might help. I'll be at the hospital this evening to speak with the family. This is clearly God's way of bringing us together. Rebecca." She was coming here. Tonight. She was going to reveal herself to my dying daughter and my wife in a hospital room, while Emily was at her most vulnerable. I closed my eyes and prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. "Lord, show me the way. I can't break my sacred vows, but I can't let my daughter suffer when help is available. What would Jesus do in this impossible situation?" That's when it hit me. The solution that had been staring me in the face. I rushed back to Emily's room where Susan was reading to her from Psalms. "Honey," I said to Susan, "I need to make some calls about Emily's adoption records. Sometimes there are ways to contact birth families in medical emergencies." Susan looked up hopefully. "Really? The agency said those records were sealed forever." "There are exceptions," I said, which was true. "Medical emergencies sometimes override privacy protections. Let me see what I can find out." What I did next tested every principle I'd lived by, but I knew it was right. I called Mrs. Patterson at the adoption agency. "This is Pastor O'Connor. Emily is in the hospital with kidney problems, and we desperately need family medical history. Is there any way to contact her birth mother?" "Oh my," Mrs. Patterson said. "That's terrible news about Emily. Let me check our files. Sometimes birth parents leave updated contact information in case of medical emergencies." She put me on hold for what felt like hours. When she returned, her voice carried excitement. "Pastor, you're in luck. The birth mother actually contacted us just last month, updating her information and specifically asking to be notified if there were ever medical issues. Her name is Rebecca Clark." "Can you contact her immediately?" I asked. "I'll call her right now and explain the situation. If she agrees to help, I can have her at the hospital within hours." 20 minutes later, Mrs. Patterson called back. "Rebecca Clark is on her way to the hospital. She says she has complete medical records from her family and is willing to undergo any testing needed to help Emily." I hung up the phone with shaking hands. I hadn't technically broken the seal of confession. I'd simply used legitimate channels to contact Emily's birth mother in a medical emergency. The fact that I already knew who she was and where to find her, well, that was information I'd keep to myself. But as I sat in that hospital room, watching Susan stroke Emily's hair while our daughter dozed fitfully, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. Because Rebecca Clark wasn't just coming to provide medical information, she was coming to claim her daughter. And she believed God Himself had orchestrated this opportunity. When she walked through that hospital room door in 2 hours, 16 years of secrets would explode into the open. Susan would learn the truth about the woman who'd been stalking our family, and Emily would discover that her birth mother wasn't some distant figure from her past. She was the woman who'd been watching her every Sunday, taking pictures and planning to take her away. What happened in that hospital room would determine not just Emily's medical future, but whether our family would survive intact or be torn apart by a love so fierce it had become dangerous. At exactly 7:30 that evening, Rebecca Clark walked into Emily's hospital room, carrying a manila folder thick with medical records. Susan looked up from her chair beside Emily's bed, her face showing polite confusion. "I'm sorry. Are you with the medical staff?" "Mrs. O'Connor," Rebecca said, her voice trembling with emotion. "My name is Rebecca Clark. I'm Emily's birth mother." The silence that followed was deafening. Susan's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, recognition, and finally, terror. "You," Susan whispered, standing up slowly. "You're the woman from the pharmacy, the one who's been asking questions about our daughter." Emily struggled to sit up straighter in her hospital bed, her green eyes wide with confusion. "I don't understand. What's happening?" Rebecca moved closer to the bed, tears streaming down her face. "Emily, sweetheart, I gave birth to you 16 years ago. I was young and scared, and I thought giving you up was the right thing to do, but I've regretted it every single day since." "That's impossible," Susan said, her voice rising. "The adoption was closed. There's no way you could know." "I hired a private investigator," Rebecca admitted. "I found you months ago. I've been coming to your church, watching Emily grow into the beautiful young woman she is today." The horror on Susan's face was heartbreaking to witness. "You've been stalking our family?" "Not stalking," Rebecca protested. "Loving, from a distance. But Emily, honey, now that you're sick, I can help you. I have complete medical records from my family, and if you need a kidney transplant—" She reached out to touch Emily's hand. "I can give you one of mine." Emily jerked her hand away, looking between the two women with growing panic. "Mom," she said to Susan, "make her stop. Make her go away." That's when I entered the room, having steeled myself for this moment during 2 hours of prayer in the chapel. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "perhaps we should step outside and let the family process this information." Susan whirled around to face me, her eyes blazing with realization. "You knew," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "You knew who she was." "Susan." "Don't you dare Susan me, Michael. This woman has been terrorizing our family for months, and you knew who she was." Her voice broke. "How could you not warn us?" I glanced at Rebecca, who was watching this confrontation with growing distress. "There are some things I cannot discuss, even with you. But I can tell you that Rebecca contacted the adoption agency today when she learned about Emily's condition. Everything she's done since then has been legitimate." "Since then?" Susan's voice was getting louder. "What about before then? What about the stalking, the questions, the watching our daughter like some kind of predator?" Emily started crying. "Stop it. All of you, just stop. I don't care who gave birth to me. Mom and Dad are my parents. You," she pointed at Rebecca, "are a stranger. And you're scaring me." Rebecca's face crumpled. "Emily, please. I know this is overwhelming, but I love you. I've always loved you. When I heard you were sick, I knew God was giving me a chance to finally be your mother in the way that matters." "The way that matters?" Susan stepped forward, her maternal instincts in full force. "I've been her mother for 16 years. I've kissed her scraped knees, helped her with homework, held her when she cried over her first heartbreak. Don't you dare tell me about what matters. Dr. Morrison chose that moment to enter the room, stopping short when he sensed the tension. "I'm sorry. I can come back." "No," I said firmly. "Doctor, this is Rebecca Clark, Emily's birth mother. She has medical records that might help with Emily's treatment." Rebecca immediately handed over her folder. "Everything's in there. My family has a history of polycystic kidney disease. My grandmother died from it, and my aunt needed a transplant when she was 30. I was tested last year, and I'm a perfect candidate for donation." Dr. Morrison opened the folder, scanning the contents. "This is exactly what we needed. With this information, we can begin proper treatment immediately." He looked at Rebecca. "Would you be willing to undergo testing to see if you're a compatible donor?" "Of course," Rebecca said without hesitation. "I'll do anything to save her." Emily's voice was small but firm. "I don't want her kidney." The room fell silent again. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. "Emily, I understand this is emotionally complex, but medically speaking, a kidney from a biological parent would give you the best chance for a full recovery." "I said no," Emily repeated, looking directly at Rebecca. "You gave up the right to be my mother 16 years ago. You don't get to come back now just because you can save my life." Rebecca's sobs filled the room. "Please, Emily. I was 19. I was scared and alone. I thought I was doing what was best for you." "You were," Emily said, her voice stronger now. "Giving me to my real parents was the best thing you ever did for me. But that doesn't mean I want you in my life now." Susan moved to Emily's bedside, taking her daughter's hand. "Sweetheart, I understand how you feel. But if Rebecca can help you get better—" "Mom." "No," Emily said firmly. "I mean it. I'd rather take my chances with dialysis and the transplant list than accept anything from her." I watched Rebecca's face as Emily's words hit her. The woman who had spent months convinced that God wanted her to reclaim her daughter was facing the reality that Emily wanted nothing to do with her. "Rebecca," I said gently, "perhaps you could step into the hallway with me for a moment." She nodded numbly, following me out of the room. In the corridor, she collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking with sobs. "She hates me," Rebecca whispered. "My own daughter hates me." "She doesn't hate you," I said, sitting beside her. "She's frightened and overwhelmed. This isn't how anyone imagined this reunion would happen." "But I can save her life," Rebecca said desperately. "Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for everything," I replied. "But Rebecca, love isn't about what we can give. It's about what we're willing to sacrifice. Emily has made it clear what she wants. The question is, are you willing to love her enough to respect her choice?" Rebecca looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "But if she dies, because I didn't try harder?" "Then you'll know you honored her wishes," I said. "Sometimes the greatest love is letting go." Back in Emily's room, Susan was having a whispered conversation with Dr. Morrison. When I returned, the doctor addressed all of us. "I've reviewed Rebecca's medical records, and she would indeed be an excellent donor candidate. But I need to be clear about something. Emily's condition is serious, but it's not immediately life-threatening. We have time to explore other options, including the transplant waiting list." Emily squeezed Susan's hand. "See? I don't have to accept her kidney. We can wait for another donor." But even as Emily spoke those brave words, I could see the fear in her eyes. And I knew that Rebecca, despite her mistakes and obsession, had given us something precious: hope. What happened next would test not just Emily's courage and Rebecca's capacity for selfless love, but our entire family's understanding of what it truly means to forgive and be forgiven. 3 months later, I stood in our sanctuary preparing for what would become one of the most meaningful services of my 20-year ministry. Emily's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. While we waited for a kidney donor, her condition had stabilized through an experimental treatment protocol that Dr. Morrison discovered in Rebecca's family medical records. The genetic information Rebecca provided had been the key to finding the right therapy, even though Emily had maintained her decision not to accept a kidney from her birth mother. But perhaps the greater miracle was what had happened in our community during those difficult months. Rebecca had kept her word about respecting Emily's wishes. She had undergone all the medical testing and remained on standby as a donor, but she never again approached Emily directly. Instead, she began what I could only describe as a journey of true repentance. She started by voluntarily participating in counseling with Dr. Sarah Chen, a family therapist who specialized in adoption issues. She also began attending our Wednesday evening Bible study, sitting quietly in the back, learning about healthy boundaries and the difference between love and obsession. "Pastor O'Connor," she had said to me after one particularly difficult session on forgiveness, "I realize now that everything I did was about my own pain, not about what was best for Emily. I told myself I was protecting her, but I was really just trying to heal my own broken heart." Susan had struggled the most with forgiveness. The violation of our family's privacy, the months of fear and anxiety, had left deep wounds. But slowly, through prayer and counseling of her own, she began to see Rebecca not as a threat, but as a woman whose love for Emily, however misguided, was genuine. The turning point came when Rebecca wrote a letter, not to Emily but to Susan. "Mrs. O'Connor," the letter began, "I want to thank you for giving Emily the childhood I could never have provided. When I watch her in church, from a respectful distance, I see a confident, faithful, loving young woman. That's not because of anything I did. That's because you and Pastor O'Connor gave her something I couldn't: a stable, loving family foundation. I was wrong to try to disrupt that. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive a foolish woman who loved her daughter so much she almost destroyed what was best for her." Susan had cried when she read that letter. That evening she made a decision that surprised us all. "Michael," she said, "I want to meet with Rebecca, not to become friends necessarily, but to set some boundaries that might allow her to be part of Emily's extended community without disrupting our family." The meeting took place in my office, with me mediating. It was awkward at first, but Susan's grace and Rebecca's genuine remorse created space for healing. "I need you to understand," Susan had said firmly, "that Michael and I are Emily's parents. We've earned that title through 16 years of love, sacrifice, and daily commitment. You gave birth to her, and I honor that gift you gave us. But parenthood is about more than biology." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I don't want to be her mother. You already are. I just want to be someone who cares about her from a distance, someone who prays for her, someone who's grateful that she exists and is happy." And slowly, carefully, that's exactly what Rebecca became. She joined our church officially, participating in community service projects and supporting our youth ministry. not to get closer to Emily, but because she genuinely wanted to serve. She volunteered at the local pregnancy center, counseling young women facing difficult decisions about their pregnancies. Emily watched this transformation with the wisdom of someone whose faith had been tested early. After 2 months of observing Rebecca's respectful distance and genuine service, Emily made her own surprising decision. "Mom," she said to Susan one evening, "I think I'd like to meet with Rebecca, not as daughter and mother, but as two people who share something important." The meeting took place in our living room with Susan and me present. Emily spoke with a maturity that amazed me. "Rebecca," she said, "I want you to know that I'm grateful you chose life for me, and I'm grateful you chose Mom and Dad to raise me. Those were both acts of love, even if the second one was hard for you." Rebecca broke down completely. "Emily, you're everything I hoped you would become. Your parents raised you to be strong and kind and faithful. I couldn't be prouder of the young woman you've become. I want you to know," Emily continued, "that I don't need another mother. But if you want to be someone who cares about me, who prays for me, who's part of our church community, I think that would be okay." And that's how we found ourselves, 3 months later, celebrating Emily's 17th birthday with a special service of Thanksgiving in our sanctuary. Rebecca sat with the rest of our congregation, no longer a threat or an outsider, but a community member who had found her place through humility and service. She had indeed remained a compatible kidney donor, listed as Emily's emergency backup, but more importantly, she had become an example of how love, when properly directed, could heal rather than harm. During my sermon that morning, I spoke about the nature of family and the mysterious ways God works through our most difficult trials. "Sometimes," I said, looking out at faces that had been marked by this journey, Susan's face showing new strength, Emily's showing wisdom beyond her years, Rebecca's showing peace she'd never known before. God allows us to face impossible situations not to punish us, but to teach us deeper truths about love, forgiveness, and community. I spoke about how true love sometimes means letting go, how real parenthood is proven through daily acts of care rather than biological connection, and how even our most painful experiences can become sources of healing for others. After the service, I watched as Rebecca approached Emily, carefully, respectfully, and handed her a small wrapped gift. "What is it?" Emily asked. "A journal," Rebecca said, "for writing down your thoughts, your dreams, your prayers. I thought it might help you remember that there are people praying for those dreams to come true." Emily smiled, not the smile of a daughter to her mother, but the smile of one person acknowledging another's kindness. "Thank you, Rebecca. That's very thoughtful." As our congregation dispersed that day, I reflected on the lessons this crisis had taught me about pastoral care, about the sometimes competing demands of confidentiality and protection, and about the way God can use even our most terrible mistakes as opportunities for grace. Rebecca had found healing through learning to love without possessing. Susan had found strength through choosing forgiveness over bitterness. Emily had found wisdom through experiencing firsthand the difference between biological connection and chosen family. And I had learned that sometimes the greatest protection we can offer those we love is not silence, but helping them discover their own strength to handle truth with grace. 6 months later, Emily was declared completely healthy, her kidney function normal, her future bright. Rebecca continued serving in our community, her life now focused on helping others rather than healing her own wounds. And our family, expanded now to include someone who loved Emily enough to let her go, had discovered that God's definition of family is far more beautiful and complex than we had ever imagined. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding our trials, but from allowing them to transform us into the people God always intended us to be.